Hello everyone, time for another part of our lecture series regarding imperialism and industrialization. And of course, keep in mind that though we are talking about England, these things do not happen necessarily in a vacuum. Also, a lot of these reforms and the changes that are going on are being impactful throughout the whole world, and not all of these things are necessarily started in England. We're focusing on this primarily to help you have an understanding whenever you start looking at world history, but also U.S. history in general. So, scientific advancements in the Industrial Revolution. Now, of course, um, the birth of science is generally considered for this. Of course, we can always talk about the Royal Society and people such as Sir Isaac Newton and things like that, that done away with a lot of the old superstitious ideas of things like magic and stuff like that that was going on, and start looking more at empirical data, testable things, in order to come up with real answers for the material world. Um, Innovations will lead to improvements in agriculture. So this is not necessarily something that is only seen within the cities. Um, so there were a lot of changes going on out in the countryside, as we've mentioned, such as the peasant class being removed from their ancient fields. But also, that doesn't mean that farming went away altogether. One thing that is going to happen is we're going to see that farming becomes a lot more efficient. Less people are going to have to work the fields in order to get grain and things like that. Larger fields can be cultivated by fewer people. Inventors such as Jethro Tull are going to invent items such as the seed drill, and of course we're also going to see innovations when we talk about American history next year, where we have things such as automatic threshers, and we're going to move on to things such as tractors and all these other things that are really going to help out. We're going to discover better methods of crop rotation, new methods of animal and plant breeding. And so you can just look around at, say, like dogs, for instance. You can see there's a whole plethora of different kinds of dog breeds. And of course, these are, brought to us by dog breeders who find certain traits they like, and they breed those traits into a recognizable pattern. This kind of thing is also done for fruits and vegetables through cross-pollination. And as far as crop rotations, if you look at ancient forms of farming, they often left the fields fallow. Because if you've never farmed, you have to realize nowadays we fertilize our fields regularly. Back before they had good methods of chemical fertilization in the old days, they would let the field just go wild. That's what fallow means. And during that time period, the soil would replenish the minerals and things and the nitrates that it requires in order for new plant growth. Well, we're going to see with crop rotation, they're going to figure out that instead of having to wait sometimes years for the soil to be good again in order to grow grains and things such as that nature, they're going to find that they can plant certain things that will actually replenish the soil, such as clovers are a good source of nutrition that's given back to the soil. So after they would grow their grains, then they would plant things such as clover, which would get the field ready to be planted once again, or I'm sorry, to be sowed or seeded once again. New inventions modernized cotton and textile industry. And so now the cotton industry, of course, during this time period is mostly going to be supplied by cotton from the American South. Eventually, however, during the Civil War, the U.S. Civil War, we're going to see a lot of that cotton is actually going to start coming from Egypt, from the Nile Valley. Cotton, of course, is a plant that's native to India. But once you start having inventions such as from the U.S. inventor Eli Whitney, you're going to see the cotton gin is going to make cotton a very inexpensive, easily workable material. It's a lot better in cotton in a lot of ways. It's lighter, If it gets wet, it doesn't just stay wet. It's easier to clean and things like that. Early factories located near water for energy and transportation. Now, this is a human fact we're going to find throughout most of history and throughout most places in the world. You need water. You need water in order to ship goods, to drink, to bathe, for your livestock. This is going to be true during this time period as well, especially before the time of the railroad and motor vehicles. I believe this is the tennis court oath from the French Revolution, which the political changes and the Industrial Revolution. New laws are passed to address new issues that come with industrialized society. So we have the Factory Act of 1833. Reduced the amount of hours that children could work in Britain. So that was a major problem. Education systems are going to have to come with time. As people move to cities in these early industrialized periods, that doesn't mean that a lot of the infrastructure we take for granted today is there, such as good sewage systems and running water and schools and stuff like that, or law enforcement. It's going to take time for these things to happen. So children always worked on the farms back when they were serfs and peasants. Well, when they go to the city, they do the same thing. The children work. And so they weren't being educated. They're working long hours, super dangerous jobs. It was pretty rough. The 10 Hours Act further reduced the work hours for women and children in Britain. So once again, this is seen as a humanitarian effort upon the government. The Reform Act of 1832 allowed 1 out of 5 men suffrage and removed rotten boroughs in Britain. All right, this is essentially as they're expanding suffrage, the right to vote, to more and more people within England. Another thing too is rotten boroughs were essentially, you could think of them as districts within England that didn't represent people, but had representatives go to Parliament. So you could think about our Senate, for example. We have 100 members in the U.S. Senate. Each state sends 2 senators, but each state has people in a state, essentially, that's being represented. Here you could think, what if the U.S. had 110 senators, and 10 of those senators represented an area nobody lived? So they were trying to fix this kind of thing in England. Now, the reason we're talking about this once again is these kind of reforms are going to happen in America as well. So yes, these are English reforms, but yes, they will come to America. Economic changes in the Industrial Revolution. The creation of the factory system led to massive production of standardized goods, readily available for purchase. And so standardized certain weights and measurements, replaceable parts that are industry standards. Instead of having to have a blacksmith make things for you, you could get something made from a factory and it would be just like the other thing made from the factory. Tariffs were reduced in order to help international trade. Keep in mind, a tariff is a tax that is placed on a foreign good coming into your country. The reason you do this is so that your own country can make these things without having to worry about cheaper competition. In 1846, the Corn Laws, corn as in grain, not necessarily like maize in America, but we're thinking about wheat and barley and stuff like that, were repealed in England. These tariffs were designed to help English farmers by keeping grain prices high. So they helped the farmers, but they made grain prices so high, food was more expensive. So that's why they repealed it. The spread of free enterprise leads to an explosion of innovation and economic development in England and much of Europe. Remember, free enterprise is the idea of free trade without laws restricting that trade. And so this is something that's going to be a really big part of the Industrial Revolution. We're going to see this reflected in America as well, especially all the way through the early 20th century and the late 19th. We're going to go ahead and end it there, and we'll pick up more later. Thank you.